My stepfather pushed me into the water as a joke. I made him the punchline. My stepfather Rodney came into my life when I was 12 years old. My mom had been single for 4 years after my dad passed away and she was lonely. Rodney was a coworker who asked her out repeatedly until she finally said yes. He was loud and confident and told jokes constantly. My mom laughed at everything he said like he was the funniest person alive. I never found him funny. From the beginning, Rodney treated me like an obstacle between him and my mother. He complained when I interrupted their conversations. He sighed when I needed rides to school activities. He made comments about how expensive kids were and how lucky he was that he never had any of his own. My mom always defended him by saying he just needed time to adjust. He never adjusted. He just got worse. When I was 14, my mom and Rodney got married. The wedding was small and I wasn't asked to be part of it. Rodney said having a kid in the ceremony would make things awkward. My mom agreed because she wanted him to be comfortable. I sat in the audience and watched my mother marry a man who couldn't even pretend to include me on the most important day of her life. That set the tone for the next 2 years. Rodney's favorite thing to do was make me the target of his jokes. He made fun of my grades even though they were decent. He made fun of my clothes even though I bought them myself with babysitting money. He made fun of my friends even though he never bothered to meet them. Every family dinner included at least one comment at my expense, followed by Rodney laughing at his own humor. My mom would tell me to lighten up. She said Rodney was just trying to bond with me. She said this was how he showed affection. I didn't feel affection. I felt small. The fishing trip happened the summer I turned 16. Rodney announced he was taking the family to a lake cabin for a long weekend. He made it sound like a generous gift, even though my mom paid for most of it. I didn't want to go, but my mom begged me to give Rodney a chance. She said it could be a fresh start for all of us. I agreed because I loved my mom and I wanted her to be happy. The first day at the cabin was fine. We unpacked and explored the area and had dinner together. Rodney was on his best behavior, and I started to think maybe this trip would be different. The second day, Rodney suggested we go fishing on the dock. He said it would be a good bonding activity. My mom stayed behind to read and told us to have fun. I followed Rodney down to the water even though I didn't really want to spend time alone with him. We fished in silence for about an hour. I actually started to relax. The lake was calm and quiet and nobody was making fun of me. Then Rodney decided the moment was too peaceful. He walked up behind me while I was focused on my line. Without any warning, he shoved me hard between my shoulder blades. I flew off the dock and hit the water face first. The lake was cold, and I swallowed a mouthful before I surfaced. My phone was in my pocket. It was destroyed. My clothes were soaked. My fishing rod sank to the bottom. When I climbed back onto the dock, coughing and shivering, Rodney was laughing so hard he could barely breathe. He said I should have seen my face. He said it was just a joke and I needed to learn to take one. He said this was exactly why he couldn't bond with me, because I was too sensitive about everything. I walked back to the cabin, dripping wet and humiliated. My mom asked what happened. Rodney told her before I could speak. He made it sound hilarious. He said I went flying and it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. My mom looked at me and then looked at him and she laughed too. She actually laughed while I stood there shaking with cold and embarrassment. She told me to go change and stop being so serious. That night I stayed in my room and planned. I wasn't going to confront Rodney. I wasn't going to yell or cry or give him the satisfaction of knowing he got to me. I was going to make him feel exactly how he made me feel. Small, embarrassed, like a joke nobody was laughing at. The next morning was our last full day at the cabin. Rodney announced he wanted to fish again. He asked if I was joining. I said sure. My mom smiled like we were finally getting along. We went back to the dock. Rodney was in a great mood because he thought his prank brought us closer together. He kept chuckling about it and asking if I was going to stand closer to the edge this time. I waited until he was focused on his line. I waited until he was leaning forward, watching for a bite. Then I kicked the back of his knee as hard as I could. His leg buckled and he went sideways off the dock. The splash was loud and messy. Water exploded around him as he hit the surface at a bad angle. I watched him disappear under the dark water for a second before he came back up gasping and coughing. His face was red and twisted with anger. He started yelling before he even got his breath back. What the hell was I thinking? Was I trying to kill him? Did I have any idea how dangerous that was? I stood on the dock looking down at him and waited for him to finish. When he paused to catch his breath, I told him it was just a joke. He needed to learn to take one. His eyes went wide and his mouth opened, but nothing came out. I turned and started walking back toward the cabin. Behind me, I heard him splashing and swearing as he tried to get to the edge of the dock. My mom came running down the path from the cabin. She was moving fast and her book was still in her hand like she forgot she was holding it. She stopped when she saw Rodney in the water. Her eyes went from him to me and back to him. What happened? Who fell in? Rodney was gripping the edge of the dock trying to pull himself up, but his leg wasn't working right. He kept yelling that I attacked him, that I kicked him off the dock for no reason. My mom's face went pale and then red. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me. I explained it calmly. I told her I kicked the back of Rodney's knee and he fell in the water, just like he pushed me in yesterday. just like he thought was so funny when I lost my phone and my fishing rod and stood there dripping wet while they both laughed. My mom's whole body went stiff. Her face turned a darker red and she started yelling. I could have seriously hurt him. What was wrong with me? Did I think this was some kind of game? She threw her book down on the ground and rushed to the edge of the dock to help Rodney. Rodney was trying to climb out, but every time he put weight on his right leg, he made a sound like someone stepped on him. His knee was already twice its normal size. The skin looked tight and shiny. He finally got himself onto the dock by dragging his body up with his arms. Once he was out of the water, he just sat there breathing hard and holding his knee. His pants were plastered to his legs and I could see how bad the swelling was getting. Part of me felt good watching him hurt. Another part of me felt sick. I didn't plan for him to get injured this bad. I just wanted him to feel stupid and small like he made me feel. A man came walking fast down the path from the cabin next to ours. He was older with gray hair and wore work boots that were covered in mud. He asked what was going on and if everyone was okay. My mom told him there was an accident. The man looked at Rodney sitting on the dock holding his knee, and his face got serious. He introduced himself as Declan Horton and said he owned the cabin we were renting. He knelt down next to Rodney and looked at the knee without touching it. He said we needed to get Rodney to the medical clinic in town right away. That knee needed to be checked by a doctor. Declan went to get his truck. My mom helped Rodney stand up on one leg. He had his arm around her shoulders and was hopping on his good leg. He wouldn't look at me. My mom wouldn't look at me either. When Declan came back with his truck, we all got in. My mom sat in the back seat with Rodney. She helped him get his legs stretched out and put her jacket under his knee. I sat up front with Declan. Nobody said anything to me. The silence was thick and heavy. It pressed down on me worse than any yelling could have. I stared out the window at the trees going by and tried not to think about how much trouble I was in. The clinic was small and looked more like a regular house than a medical building. There was only one doctor working and he took Rodney back right away. My mom went with him. Declan and I sat in the waiting room. He didn't ask me any questions. He just sat there reading a magazine about fishing. I watched the clock on the wall and counted the minutes. After about 40 minutes, the doctor came out with Rodney on crutches. My mom was next to him looking worried. The doctor said it was a bad sprain with possible ligament damage. He had wrapped the knee in a tight bandage and given Rodney pain medication. Rodney needed to see an orthopedic specialist when we got home to make sure nothing was torn. The doctor said Rodney was lucky it wasn't worse. The drive back to the cabin was even quieter than the drive to the clinic. Declan dropped us off and said to let him know if we needed anything else. My mom thanked him about 5 times. Once he was gone, she helped Rodney into the cabin and got him settled on the couch with his leg up on pillows. Then she came and found me in my room. I was sitting on the bed staring at the wall. She closed the door behind her and just stood there for a minute. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaking. She was crying. She asked me how I could hurt someone like that. She said this wasn't who she raised me to be. She said she didn't even know who I was anymore. I felt something break open inside me. All the things I'd been holding in for 4 years came pouring out. I told her about every single joke Rodney made at my expense. Every time he made fun of my clothes or my grades or my friends. Every family dinner where he used me as his punchline. Every time she told me to lighten up and stop being so sensitive. Every moment I felt small and unwanted in my own family. I told her about sitting in the audience at their wedding watching her marry someone who couldn't even pretend to include me. I told her how it felt to stand there dripping wet while they both laughed at me yesterday. My voice kept getting louder, and I couldn't stop the words from coming out. My mom's face changed while I was talking. She looked shocked. She kept shaking her head like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. When I finally stopped talking, she sat down on the bed next to me. She said Rodney was just trying to bond with me. She thought I understood that. She said he didn't know how to connect with kids because he never had any of his own. She kept saying she thought I knew it was all in good fun. She thought we were getting closer. Her voice sounded confused, like she genuinely didn't see what had been happening right in front of her for 4 years. I told her I didn't care if she understood. I said I spent 4 years being the target and she let it happen. She wiped her eyes and said she was sorry. She said she would fix this. She stood up and walked out of my room without saying anything else. I sat there feeling empty. The anger was gone, but I didn't feel better. I just felt tired. I heard my mom talking to Rodney in the living room, but I couldn't make out the words. Their voices got louder. My mom sounded firm in a way I hadn't heard before. Rodney's voice was defensive and angry. About 20 minutes later, I heard the uneven thump of crutches in the hallway. Rodney pushed my door open without knocking. He stood there leaning on the crutches with his wrapped knee bent. His face was red and his jaw was tight. He told me I needed to apologize right now. He said what I did was wrong and I knew it. I looked at him and said no. He stared at me like he couldn't believe what he just heard. He said I was exactly the ungrateful kid he always knew I was. He said this whole thing proved he was right about me from the start. He said I was selfish and violent, and he should have known better than to try connecting with someone like me. I didn't say anything back. I just looked at him until he turned around and left. The rest of the day was awful. Nobody talked. My mom made sandwiches for lunch and we ate in silence. Rodney stayed on the couch with ice on his knee. I stayed in my room. The cabin felt smaller and more uncomfortable with every hour that passed. That evening, my mom knocked on my door and said we were leaving in the morning instead of staying the last night. She said she would start packing after dinner. Dinner was leftovers that nobody wanted to eat. We sat at the table and pushed food around our plates. The only sound was forks scraping against dishes. Someone knocked on the cabin door around 7. My mom answered it. A woman's voice said she was Grace from next door. She said her husband Declan mentioned what happened, and she wanted to bring over some ice packs and pain medication. My mom thanked her and invited her inside. I heard them talking in the living room. Grace's voice was quiet but clear. She said she heard Rodney laughing yesterday about pushing someone in the water. She said it seemed mean to her. She said her own brother used to do things like that and call them jokes, but they never felt like jokes to the person it happened to. There was a long silence after that. My mom came and got me from my room. She asked me to come to the living room. Grace was standing near the door holding a bag. Rodney was still on the couch. My mom sat down in the chair across from him. She looked at Rodney and asked if he really pushed me off the dock as a prank. Her voice was steady, but I could hear something breaking underneath it. Rodney looked annoyed. He said yes, he pushed me, but it was harmless fun. He said I overreacted by retaliating with violence. He said what I did was way worse than what he did. My mom asked if he thought about how it made me feel. Rodney said I needed to learn to take a joke. He said if I couldn't handle a little teasing, then I was too sensitive for the real world. Grace quietly left while they were talking. My mom sat there looking at Rodney like she was seeing him for the first time. The next morning, we packed up the car in silence. Rodney sat in the back seat with his injured knee stretched across the seat. My mom drove. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the trees go by. Nobody turned on the radio. Nobody spoke. The 2-hour drive felt like it lasted forever. Every minute was heavy and uncomfortable. When we finally got home, Rodney hobbled inside on his crutches and went straight to the bedroom. My mom and I unloaded the car. She kept looking at me like she wanted to say something but didn't know what. 2 days later, my mom told me she made an appointment with a family therapist. She said all 3 of us were going. Rodney came out of the bedroom and said therapy was unnecessary. He said it was expensive and a waste of time. He said we could work this out ourselves without paying someone to listen to us talk. My mom looked at him and said we were going. Her voice was firm. Rodney started to argue, but my mom cut him off. She said this wasn't up for discussion. Rodney went back to the bedroom and slammed the door. My mom sat down at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands. The orthopedic specialist appointment happened 3 days after that. My mom drove Rodney to the office. I stayed home. When they got back, Rodney looked angry and my mom looked worried. She told me the specialist confirmed a partially torn ligament. She said Rodney needed physical therapy for months. She said the injury might cause permanent problems if he didn't take recovery seriously. Rodney said it was all my fault. He said I ruined his knee and now he had to deal with this for the rest of his life. My mom told him to stop. Rodney looked shocked. My mom never told him to stop before. The first therapy session was the following week. We sat in a small office with comfortable chairs and nature pictures on the walls. The therapist was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and glasses. She asked us to introduce ourselves and explain why we were there. Rodney jumped in first. He said he was the victim. He said I was a violent kid who attacked him without reason. He said he tried for years to bond with me, but I rejected every attempt. He said this whole situation proved I had anger issues that needed to be addressed. The therapist listened without interrupting. Then she looked at me and asked for my side. I told her everything. The jokes, the wedding, the doc, my mom crying in the corner. When I finished, the therapist was quiet for a moment. She turned to Rodney and asked him to describe his relationship with me over the past 4 years. She asked him to give specific examples of how he tried to bond. Rodney started talking about his jokes. He described making fun of my clothes and grades. He talked about the pranks he played. As he spoke, his voice got less confident. Even he seemed to realize how one-sided and mean everything sounded when he said it out loud. The therapist asked if he ever tried bonding through shared interests or activities that didn't involve making me the target. Rodney didn't have an answer. He just sat there looking uncomfortable. The therapist turned to my mom. She asked why my mom allowed this dynamic to continue for so long. My mom's eyes filled with tears. She said she ignored my feelings because she was afraid of losing Rodney. She said after being alone for 4 years following my dad's death, she couldn't face being single again. She said she convinced herself that Rodney's jokes were harmless. She said she told herself I was being too sensitive because that was easier than admitting her husband was cruel to her son. Her voice broke and she started crying. The therapist handed her tissues and told her that acknowledgement was an important first step. Over the next month, things slowly shifted at home. Rodney stopped making jokes at my expense. He didn't apologize, but he stopped. He was cold and distant while recovering from his injury. He spent most of his time doing physical therapy exercises in the living room. When we passed each other in the hallway, he didn't say anything. My mom started checking in with me more. She asked how I was feeling. She asked about school. She stopped defending Rodney automatically. One evening, about 2 weeks after our last session, I was doing homework at the kitchen table when Rodney came in to get a drink. He started making a comment about how I was probably copying answers from the internet. Before he could finish, my mom looked up from her magazine and told him to stop. She said she was tired of hearing negative comments about me and that he needed to find something nice to say or keep quiet. Rodney looked surprised and walked out of the room without another word. My mom glanced at me and went back to reading like nothing happened, but I noticed her hands were shaking a little. Over the next few weeks, she did that kind of thing more often. She interrupted when Rodney started to criticize my clothes. She insisted I sit with them during movie nights instead of letting Rodney wave me away. She asked about my day at the school and actually listened to my answers. It wasn't dramatic or life-changing, but it was different. Rodney noticed too, and he started being more careful around both of us. 6 months passed and Rodney finished his physical therapy. His knee worked mostly normal again, though he said it hurt when the weather changed. We settled into a routine that wasn't warm but wasn't hostile either. Rodney stopped making jokes at my expense completely. He talked to me about basic things like asking if I needed a ride somewhere or telling me dinner was ready. Sometimes we even had short conversations about normal stuff like sports or what was on TV. He never apologized for the years of put-downs or for pushing me off the dock. I never apologized for kicking his knee. We just moved forward in this weird middle ground where we weren't family but we weren't enemies. My mom and I started talking more honestly too. She admitted she made mistakes by choosing Rodney's comfort over my feelings. I told her I understood she was scared of being alone, but that it hurt anyway. We were figuring out how to trust each other again. It was slow and awkward and nothing like those perfect family reconciliation stories you see in movies. But it was real and it was ours, and that had to be enough.